Are you ready to take your business to the next level? Every day, there are countless books and articles that are published offering the key on how to make your business a success. It's easy to feel overwhelmed trying to keep up and run your business. That's why Deb Creer created the Business Power Hour. Keep up on the latest trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. Let the Business Power Hour do the heavy work for you.
Good morning. Good morning. I am Deb Creer, and I am passionate about giving professionals the tools that they need to make themselves and their businesses as successful as possible. And today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite subjects. We're going to be talking about marketing. And there's a lot of misperceptions about marketing. Marketing has changed a lot. And I think that's one of the big things that people forget. And they don't realize, we need to kind of do some things differently. So please join me in welcoming Deanna Shimota to our program today. Welcome, Deanna. How are you?
Hi, Deb. It's great to be here. I am good.
Perfect. I love it. Well, let me tell people a little bit about you, and then we'll jump into this. So Deanna Shimota is the CEO of GrowthMode Marketing. She made it her mission to know everything about B2B marketing and demand generation. Deanna worked exclusively in B2B marketing for over 20 years, and she's owned her own B2B marketing agency for over 7 years. She used her skills and expertise to catapult multiple technology companies into high growth mode. Now she leads growth mode marketing, intending to assist other organizations to travel down this same path of success. So again, Deanna, welcome.
Thank you.
Well, I always like to know from my guests how it is that they got to where they are today. So tell us a little bit more about your history.
How did I get here? Great question. So, I went to college thinking I wanted to do PR in the dairy industry. And that is a long story, but to fast forward, I did not end up ultimately doing PR in the business or in the dairy industry. I ended up landing in marketing in B2B. So I went to college, got a degree in marketing communications. I think it's rare these days that marketers actually have, a marketing background when they come into it. But I have always worked in marketing and I worked in corporate roles, always on the B2B side. And as I grew in my career, I took on more responsibility and I started managing and building marketing departments from the ground up at companies that were on a mission for high growth. And ultimately, my last stop on the corporate side, I was a VP of marketing at an organization that was in the network security space and was private equity backed, had a high growth mission on my shoulders and building out that marketing foundation for them. And as I was doing that, I was getting frustrated because I was trying to work with agencies who didn't really seem to understand how challenging it is to be in an organization that has high growth expectations, where you have to justify the dollars that you're spending, not only to the board of directors, but to your investors.
Right.
And I would go out to the agencies and they would be like, hey, I need leads. I need them now. I need you to help me execute on these programs and to help bring some strategic thinking to this. And they would come in and be like, we're going to help you create an amazing brand experience. And I was like, hold up. As a marketer, I truly appreciate the value of a good brand experience. In fact,
we got that.
I'll probably talk. Right. I'll talk about that today because that is a really important piece of the puzzle. But the way they were positioning the conversation, it was like they didn't understand where my priorities were because we should have had a different conversation than let's talk about your brand experience. So I had lunch with a colleague that I used to work with one day, and she was a VP of marketing at another organization, and we were talking, and I was just telling her how frustrated I was with my agency experience. And she said, you know what, I am having the same experience. Maybe we should start an agency. So long story short, a couple months later, we ended up founding GrowthMode Marketing. And for the past 8 years now, this is the gig I've been doing, is helping other organizations that are on a growth mission.
I love it. And so many things in there to talk about. I love that you say high growth because, it's funny. Everybody should be in high growth mode, right? I mean, that's kind of, because the opposite is low growth or no growth. But I think so many companies coast. We're able to pay the bills, and so we're okay with that. And and so they're not thinking about how they can be expanding, whatever it is that they're, and then when something like, say COVID hits, they have absolutely no idea what to do. So talk to me a little bit more about high growth.
Yeah, I think there are organizations out there that certainly they might be lifestyle businesses, or maybe they've gotten to a certain point and they're satisfied with where they're at because they're very profitable. But there's this whole slew of organizations out there, especially in the private equity and the VC world, where cash is being put into these companies specifically with the intention that we're going to grow them and get a bigger return on our investment.
Right.
And with those organizations, a lot of times, if you're a company, when you get founded, marketing is not always the first thing that they're focused on, which seems, a little counterintuitive because you're like, they're not going to buy from you if they don't know you exist, right? But if you're a founder and you're coming into a company, you're more focused on how do we develop a product that's going to have a great market fit, and then we'll figure out the rest. How do we go and sell it? How do we build that brand awareness? All those pieces of it. And so what we see working with organizations in the B2B space is they get to a certain point where they start to have, like, their private investors are telling them, okay, you got to turn on the switch. It's time to start growing rapidly. You've gotten some initial success in the market, or maybe you've grown to a certain point and you've kind of stalled. We want to see what we can do as far as growing this company so we can get a return on our investment. And that is where a lot of organizations start to look at it and say, maybe we don't have this built out marketing department today. How do we get started with building out that marketing foundation to build that brand awareness, credibility, and trust in the market, and ultimately create the demand for your brand and your products and services?
Well, and a lot of times they skip steps. First of all, we see the fact that many companies think that sales is marketing. No, you have sales and you have marketing, and they should work very closely together. But it's different thought processes. But we've also seen companies that go, okay, we're ready to grow, and they don't do it strategically. They make a big leap. I was in a business yesterday that I know is struggling, and it's a business I absolutely love. And so, well, it would be about 3 years ago, right before COVID, where they doubled their space size and doubled all sorts of other things because they were going to grow. And then, of course, COVID hit. And now they are truly struggling because they have all this space that is empty space. I mean, they don't even have anything in it. And I'm sure they've gone back to, their landlord and said, hey, and the landlord was probably, no, you signed that contract. But they really had big plans, but they had absolutely no idea how to implement them. And that is one of the biggest parts of marketing, is to figure out, how are we getting from A to B to C?
Yes, and I think that's a great example, and it happens all the time. These organizations, they have aspirations to grow. And, like, I've talked to organizations where they're like, we're going to have sales-led growth. What that means is they're going to invest a ton of money into a sales team. And the thought is, the more salespeople you add, the more you're going to go out in the market and sell, right? The challenge with that type of approach is, if you don't have the strategy behind how you're going to build that brand awareness and credibility in the market, those sales team members, no matter how many of them you add, are going to have a really hard time getting traction. Because at the end of the day, when you look at how a B2B buyer makes purchase decisions today, they're waiting till much, much later in their buying process to engage with a sales rep. In fact, they're making up to 80% of that purchase decision on their own before they have a sales conversation. And so if you think about sales rep perspective, if you're not making the short list, they don't get to have that conversation. You know, it doesn't unfortunately work the way it used to, where you could pick up a phone, call someone cold, and get them to take an appointment with you. And lo and behold, you know, months later, they turn into a client, right? The way that prospects are buying means that organizations need to be strategic. And if you're going to grow, marketing needs to be a priority, you know, and I say that not as somebody who does marketing for a living, but as somebody who has seen organizations of all shapes and sizes and the approaches that they've taken, and has really, you know, taken the time to understand, like, how does a B2B buyer or a prospect make a decision? And you know, there are certainly companies out there that have grown and succeeded by pure, like, just running 100 miles per hour and doing a lot of heavy lifting from a sales perspective, but it's not scalable.
Right.
And really, that's where you need to think about the marketing and how that strategy fits into the big picture of growth. Is as you grow bigger, sheer might alone is not going to get you to that next level, because you only have so much people power to do that. And so how do you start to create that inbound funnel where people know about you and they have an affinity for your product and they actually want to raise their hand and work with you? And they're like, someday when I'm in market, I'm going to work with you. Because that's what creates the catalyst to growth, is when you're able to create that demand in the market.
Right. So let's talk something basic first. B2B, you know, because all these terms get thrown around and then people start making terms up. I like that when they do that. I'm like, what? So what is your definition of B2B?
I'm glad you asked, because I think marketing has a lot of acronyms that we use. And if I use
or
one,
like the government,
in this conversation, right, call me out and I'll explain what it is. But so B2B, from my perspective, you know, the basic business to business, it's any company that's selling their products or services to another business. So you're not selling to an individual consumer. You know, it's not like, I'm Deanna, I'm going to go out and buy a car or tennis shoes today. It's, I'm Deanna, I work for this Fortune 500 company. I'm going to go buy this technology solution on behalf of the company to bring into the company.
Well, and I think that, you know, one of the things B2C, you decide, I'm going to go buy tennis shoes. I mean, you know, you might research it a bit, you do, you know, whatever. But B2B often has a very long cycle and multiple parties. And I think that's the other thing that people forget is, you know, they get in front of somebody and, you know, and that works great, but they're not the decision maker. And they might not even know who the decision maker is. I mean, all sorts of things. And so then, you know, if they've even been talking to a salesperson, the salesperson is like stuck, you know, and because it is a longer cycle in most cases, you have to, like we were saying, you have to plan strategically for that. You know, Nike knows that they're going to sell X number of pair of shoes every month. They're, you know, pretty certain based on history, all those various things. But, you know, and so they can plan for that. But when you're having to plan for a long-term type of thing, and some of these decisions in many cases take months, even years, depending on what the product is. And, you know, and that's where marketing comes in to keep that going.
Right. So, you know, I think the more expensive the purchase, typically the longer it's going to take, right? It's not like I went on Instagram, I saw this pair of pants. I wasn't planning to buy pants, but guess what? I just bought a pair of pants and spent $100, right? That's B2C. In B2B, let's say you're selling a technology system and it's $500,000 per year. You're not going to pick up the phone, call someone and convince them that day when they weren't already considering it. hey, why don't
Got
you
this
buy
thing,
this
yeah.
this month, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
the reality is, in good economic times,
Mm-hmm.
only up to 5% of companies in your total addressable market are actually in market to buy at any given time.
Right.
When the economy is tight, I've read articles that have said it's probably closer to 1% of companies.
Right.
So if your total addressable market was 10,000 companies, take 1% of that 10,000. That's how many companies are actually in the realm to buy anywhere in the near future, right? So taking a step back from a marketing perspective and looking at that and understanding, okay, 95% or more of my total addressable market is not in market to buy today. And it's very, very unlikely that I'm going to convince them, especially at the higher the price point, that they need to buy right now. So you have to look at, how do I build out marketing programs to engage the prospects that are not in market today, because those future clients are important to your future growth. And knowing that they make up to 80% of that purchase decision before they're willing to engage with you. If you're not marketing to those other 95% of companies, you're going to have a much harder time hitting those growth targets than if you're going out there and you're building demand in the market before people are in market to buy.
Right. Right. Yeah. They know they need it. They know they need it, say, next year. But you need to stay in their mind so that when they're ready to make that purchase, or to, start making those considerations, they go, oh, I got to call Deanna. They're not, I don't know, and because then they're going to turn to whoever. But yeah, and you mentioned funnel. And I think that is something that is so very important, because sometimes those funnels are really, really long. And more importantly, I think of them as like being porous. It's very easy for somebody to go whoop and just be gone from that funnel for a variety of reasons. Maybe that person is no longer with the company, which happens a lot, right? Or various things. So you just have to keep being in there and making sure that they know that you exist.
Yeah, and you had mentioned a little bit ago about there being multiple people typically involved in a buying process. I have seen statistics that say 10 to 11 people. I've seen statistics that have said up to 23 people in an organization. Now you got to assume those organizations are probably the enterprise level, like super large,
right? Yeah, they've got
employees, right?
Yeah, they're and they're not spending $20; they're spending 20 million.
Exactly, right? So they have a lot of people involved, and I have this visual that I got from Gartner, which is an analyst firm in the B2B space, that shows what the typical B2B buying process looks like for technology. And it's not a straight linear line. It's not like we start at step 1, we go to step 2. It's like it goes up, it goes down, it goes backwards, it goes back forward. Like it's all over the place to show that. Yes, that's a great way to think about it. There are so many intertwined pieces of the puzzle in that sales process, and things can change quickly, because it may be like, I've spent 6 months working with this company, and their CEO is the ultimate, person to sign off on this. And oh, guess what? The CEO just left and a new one's coming in, and they're interim until they hire a full-time one. So you might have 3 CEOs during that 18-month sales process, not to mention all the other, 22 other people involved in that process. Just all the changes where there's starts and there's stops, and there's like, I got this person this far, but then this one, like the Trojan horse came in, and now I have to, educate them and get them on board, and you've got to get all these people along on this journey. So yes, the B2B buying process, especially if you're selling big ticket, like technology solutions, can be very complex. And it's important from a marketing standpoint that you've got the programs in place, not just to build that brand awareness and credibility before they're in market, but even when they're in market, when they've raised their hand and said, hey, we're interested in learning more about you, we're going to make a purchase. It still can take months, right? I mean, the 18 months it might take, that's once they say they're interested in it. And so how do you continue to nurture them from a marketing standpoint and stay in front of them? Because you can't touch every one of those people every day. They would get annoyed as all get up, and
they're
it's
gonna
not realistic,
you know,
right?
unsubscribe.
Right. They're like, wow, this company's a little too aggressive for my taste. You know, I'm gonna back off. So
right. You know, and frequently it's also something where it's not the salesperson who is doing all of those connections. The salesperson might only deal with one person. Because again, depending on what it is, you know, IT, like you were saying, you know, and tech, you might actually have your developers, your programmers who are part of that process. And the salesperson is only just kind of there every once in a while, if at all. I mean, they might be there at the start, excuse me, they might be there at the end, but all of that in between is tricky. And to me, the thing that marketing does is it makes that all consistent, so that what the salesperson says is the same thing that your tech people say, is the same thing that, you know, all of those people say, and all the materials that they're getting are also consistent. You know, because the worst thing is when you get further down the road and they're like, but Bob promised us X and Sue says she can't do that. You know, it's just that's part of this is, you know, because it can take so long, and you know, and very rarely do you start with the same people at the beginning that you have at the end. I mean, it's too long a time frame for that to happen.
yeah, I would say that's true when you're in bigger organizations. It's a little less complicated in smaller organizations, or if, say, you're selling a $20,000 solution or even $100,000 solution versus, you know, the multi-million-dollar solutions. But I think there's still lessons you can learn from it. Is you got to have a strategy behind it.
Right. So, you know, one of the things is, you know, how we get those people, right? And so for years, we have been told we need to have lead generation. We need all these people to put into the funnel, right? And it's funny, you know, so let's see, as we're doing this, it's 1:00 my time. And I've had probably 5 communications at least, either emails or through LinkedIn. We can sell you 5,000 qualified leads. Now they don't even know what I do. You know, so how can they tell me they can do 5,000? But they're not really. I mean, it's like, you know, when we used, and we still do, you know, direct mail. When you bought a mailing list and you bought X zip code, that's basically what many, not all. I mean, every once in a while you do have good companies that sell you good lists, but when they're selling you a list, they're not selling you a list of true qualified people. They're selling you not even maybe lukewarm bodies. You know, it's just they've got 5,000 emails and that's what they're going to give you. So what you talk about is demand generation. So what is the difference between them, and why is demand generation so much more important?
So I think many people think that lead generation and demand generation are one and the same thing, that they're interchangeable terms, and they're actually very different strategies. Lead generation is where your marketing programs are only focused on the 5% of companies that are currently in market.
Right.
You're asking a prospect for a meeting and you're trying to pull them into your sales process.
And they might not even know that they're a prospect. You're just kind of out there getting anybody you can get.
Yeah, at a very high level, using the example you brought up, Deb, about purchasing a list. Let's say you purchase a list, you blast out an email, you've got a report, like a research report that you created. In that email, you're marketing to them like, read our report. They click on it, they get to a landing page, they have to fill out a form with their contact information in order to access that report. Now what happens is marketing takes that contact, hands it maybe to a sales development rep or a sales team member, and says, okay, I got a hot one for you, follow up. Right?
Yeah, they responded.
Right. They've got a hot one. And so sales immediately follows up with that individual. The challenge with that approach is that just because I downloaded content does not mean I'm actually in market to buy, right? They did not demonstrate any buying intent. But with lead generation, what you're doing is you're working on trying to build a quantity of leads and contacts for sales to follow up with. Demand generation on the flip side is focused on driving value, not just with the 5% that are currently in market, but also the 95% who are not looking to buy right now. And so you're creating marketing programs that are focused on building the brand awareness, credibility, and trust with prospects to create demand in the market and ultimately capture it. But what you're trying to do is build that affinity for your product. So when the prospect is in market, they actually ask you for a meeting and invite you into your buying process. So the difference is like lead gen, you're trying to pull them into your sales process. Demand gen, you're working to get invited into their buying process. So it's a much different strategy. And I will say like lead generation is more of a short term. How do we uncover opportunities that are in market today?
And you have to work them hard.
Right. You have to work them hard for sure. Whereas demand generation is a long-term strategy where you're saying, we're going to build up this audience who engages with our content, who starts to have trust in our brand and sees us as credible and starts to have that affinity for our solution and wants to work with us someday when they're ready. And they raise their hand when they're actually in market. And, you know, it's not like you get to sit back and the leads just start pouring in. It takes time to build all this out. But because you're building that affinity or that demand out in the market, what happens is even your outbound motions start to be more effective because you're not calling somebody or emailing them and they don't know who you are and they don't trust you and the walls go up. Now you're more like somebody that they've been, you know, paying attention to and following, and they're more receptive to having those conversations.
Right. You know, and it's easier for sales, you know, rather than, you know, doing almost virtually cold calls to 100 people, you know, that you have on this list. They might be calling 5 who have said, hey, we're interested. We want more information.
Yes. Yep. And, you know, which lead would you rather get, right? The one who downloaded your white paper, begrudgingly gave their contact information and now is avoiding your phone calls and emails, or the one who actually submitted a form without being prompted to say, hey, I'd like to talk to a sales rep. You know, 5 of those high quality leads are going to be much more valuable, quite frankly, than 500 leads that have no buying intent.
Right. Yeah. You know, and you want to keep those others, like you said, on the list because you never know. I mean, you know, their situation might change. And so it's, you know, and I've seen people who've done that. Well, you know, we haven't heard from them in a year. They're off our list. You know, you never know when they might, you know, be interested. And so, you know, it just, so maybe you've dropped from emailing them, you know, every week, which that's probably a little too much, but, you know, to maybe once a quarter. So you're still there. You're still not quite top of mind, but you still exist for them. You know, and so it's not, you know, and you know, there even those that tell you no, because you know, I've talked with folks a lot, you know, about how to do sales, and you know, what do you do when you get that no? Is it the no, I will never, ever, 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 ever do business with you? Okay, fine, and they're taken off the list. Most of the time, it's no, not now. And so, you know, how do you keep them in there? And that's where this works, is you just kind of keep, hello, we're still here. You know, hey, we've got a new product, you know, things like that.
Yeah, when we advise our clients at GrowthMode Marketing around building out a demand generation engine, there are 3 pillars that make up that engine that we recommend to them. The first is strategy, the second is content, and the third is distribution. And that sounds so simplistic. There's a lot more to it. From a strategy perspective, the key is to start with defining an ideal customer profile. And these are the best fit companies to target. And the way I try to explain it to people, because they're like, we work in HR technology a lot. it's a very, very crowded space.
Right.
There are over 21,000 plus HR technology solutions out there.
Wow. I had no idea.
Yeah, thousands of options to solve all the HR challenges you could potentially think of out there. Well, if you go out there and you're marketing, and the way you approach marketing is, we can sell to any organization that, let's say they're being really specific, has 5,000 employees or more.
Okay.
That's a very big total addressable market, right? The problem is, if everybody in that market is trying to sell to them, it's very crowded and it's really hard to stand out. So the point of an ideal customer profile is, how do you actually narrow down the audience as a marketing strategy? Not saying you can't sell and service people outside of that ideal customer profile, but you need a message that resonates with them. And so, to take, for example, if I am an HR leader at a manufacturing company and I've got 10 recruitment management platforms marketing to me, they all kind of sound the same. I feels like they all solve the same problems, right? There might be little differences between each, but it's overwhelming as the buyer to determine the right one. And so the one that has the nicest marketing might win. The one that
they
has
like the salesperson.
Exactly. The friendliest salesperson, like they connect the best with them. Like, or they might be price shopping and nobody wants to.
Yeah. They're going to go with the lowest
one. Right. And so, as the manufacturing HR leader, if there was one out of that 10 that all of their marketing material was talking about how they understand the unique nuances of being an HR leader in the manufacturing space. So they're talking about the challenge of high turnover, the training, the OSHA, the unions, the shift differentials, all the things that make my job extra hard as that HR leader in manufacturing. And they're the only one that's talking about it. And then they're talking about how their technology ties back to helping make that easier for me. Which one of those 10 do you think I'm going to connect with the most and be more likely to go with, right? So it can seem counterintuitive to business leaders when they hear, like, you've got to narrow down your audience, because they're looking at it saying, the more lines I put in the water, the more fish I catch, right? It's like, well, but you got to use better bait, because there's a lot of fishing poles for them to choose from. So that ideal customer profile helps you kind of narrow down and focus to build the rest of the building blocks for your demand generation engine.
Right.
Then we help organizations develop what we call a unique point of view framework. And this is a story to help challenge thinking in the market, because many times what we have found is that technology solutions are not differentiated enough in a buyer's mind for that organization to really stand out. And it's hard for them to come up with meaningful differentiators. And so it's like, if you are in a spot where you're like, okay, our technology isn't drastically different, and we recognize that relying on differentiators like our exceptional customer support and our integration capabilities and all these things that a buyer sees as table stakes, then what do you do, right? How do you stand out? And that's where the unique point of view, it's really like taking your ideal customer profile and mapping out, like, what are all the unique pain points that they have? And how does our solution tie back to that? And how do we challenge the thinking in the market so that they start to see that and they start to follow along and they start to buy into what you're saying? Like, you're right. It is harder to be an HR leader in manufacturing. And I do need to think about these things. And, you know, I've just been kind of going along with this because this is the market norm. But what you're saying challenges that. And I think I agree with you, right? So that's where, like, really hyper focusing your marketing strategy will help you get that traction to create that catalyst for growth. And then it's about developing out your content marketing and demand generation plan. And so the content and the distribution, that's how do we create really good content for all stages of the buyer's journey, and in multiple formats, and slice and dice it, and all these strategies around content that's very hyper focused to your ideal customer profile and telling your unique point of view over and over. And then that distribution is, how do you get that great content out in front of your audience in all the places that they're hanging out? And that's a three-legged stool.
Right. And it's multiple messages. I mean, you don't just have, say, I wrote this white paper. You have to have so many different things that, because like we said, there could be 22 people that you're having to reach.
Yeah.
And so you need something different for each one. And it could be that some do need a 20-page white paper. Somebody else needs, here's what your ROI will be. And so you have to know how you reach those with those messages, because if say you send their chief marketing officer the white paper, they don't care. They're relying on somebody else to tell them if this works or doesn't. They need to know what is the bang for the buck.
Yep, absolutely. And the key from a distribution standpoint, it's a three-legged stool. So it's your website, managed channels, and third-party channels. With your website, knowing that prospects are making up to 80% of that purchase decision before they're talking to you, how deep can they go? What questions can they get answered from your site that will give them enough information to feel like, okay, I'm ready to talk to a sales rep? So pricing pages, case studies, video demos, like people don't want to book a live demo to see it for the first time because they don't want to get sucked into that sales process.
They don't want to be getting those phone calls from the sales people.
But they want to see the basics of how it works to decide if they're even going to move forward to engage with that sales rep. So you've got to have really good content on your website. You've got to have enough content and connect it all so that if I'm Googling and I land on your website, I find the answer I'm looking for and I get sucked into more content and I keep going deeper, right? Because the more they engage with your content, the better, the more trust it's building. And if you don't have that, what happens is they go on, maybe they find the answer, maybe they don't. They hop back on Google and they go to the next site. And that's a missed opportunity.
Yeah, if it is too hard to find it, they go to the next one that's easier. And that's where you absolutely have to know what your web stats are. Are people staying on a page long enough that they read it all? From there, what did they do? From there, what did they do? And it seems complicated, but those technologies exist to make that really pretty simple. Because you might go, oh my gosh, my website got 10,000 hits this month. Well, but if nobody stayed longer than, say, 10 seconds, it doesn't matter. And that's kind of, one of those things, or nobody clicked the thing to say, hey, I want to download the white paper or anything like that. You have to know what their progression is. And it might even be that, depending on what you're doing, you do the heat maps. Are they looking in the top right corner more? Are they, and to me, I geek out on that stuff. I think that's just fun. But it is something you have to know, and it's the old sales process. The salesman could tell you, we did this, we did this, we did this. Well, now your website's telling you that.
Exactly. And then the other two legs of that distribution stool, the managed channels and the third party channels. So managed channels is about building up an audience that wants to continually consume and engage with your content.
Okay.
So I always explain it as, think about the type of marketing tactics where you can control what you publish, when you publish, and how often you publish. And you're putting all this stuff out there with the intention that you get people interested enough that they want to keep consuming your content. So for example, this podcast would be a great example of a managed channel.
Okay.
Because you're building content to build an audience. And the more that audience follows along, the more trust it builds, and the more likely they are when they have a need to raise their hand and say, I know that Deb does this. I trust her because I've heard how smart she is on her podcast talking to all her guests. I'm going to call her when I'm in market to make that purchase.
Mm-hmm.
Things like podcasts, webinar series, social media, even email campaigns, digital advertising, all of those things, you can build out those programs to build up that audience and drive them ultimately to your site. And then that third leg of the stool is the third-party channels. And this is, how do you tap into existing relevant audiences where your ideal customer profile is hanging out?
Okay.
So you're looking at opportunities within the industry, within, the niche of influencers, publications, events, resources, all these things that are tied to your ideal customer profile to build that brand awareness beyond your own channels. And, if you're in a spot where you don't have any brand awareness, it's a great way to kind of introduce your organization and your products to this audience and try to pull them into your own managed channels.
Right. So, you talk about finding that niche. You specifically market to HR companies, or HR technology firms.
Yeah.
How did you decide that was, because again, like you said, that's still a pretty big market, but that's better than we're going to market to the world, right? Which is what a lot of people say when we ask, and who is your perfect client? Everyone? No. How did you decide that you wanted to work with HR technology firms?
Well, Deb, my perfect client is anybody with a B2B marketing need. But the reality is that's too broad, right?
Right.
We can, at GrowthMode Marketing, absolutely work with companies outside of the HR.
Right. Your products transfer to other industries.
And quite frankly, we do. But from a marketing perspective, like I can tell you personally as an agency, marketing agencies are a dime a dozen. They're out there. They all, in theory, do the exact same thing, right? And it's hard to get any traction. And so we kind of learned from our own experience, like you can't be everything to everyone. You've got to focus in and specialize. And so how we landed on our marketing strategy is going to be to build out this demand gen engine to attract HR technology companies. Is we had a lot of experience working with HR technology companies. My former business partner and I both previously worked in that industry. So naturally, over the years, we spoke that language. And because of our personal networks, we had clients from that sector all the time. So we were like, maybe we should specialize in this. Took a step back, evaluated that market, which happens to be growing significantly. There's a lot of private equity and VC funding that has gone into this space specifically, and just hundreds, if not thousands, of new technologies coming out every year in this space. So we knew it was a big enough market that we're not going to run out of opportunities, right? But also took a step back and looked at what is the competitive landscape of marketing agencies that specialize in HR technology. And to this day, only found one.
Yes, I was going to say, I have never heard of any. I mean, that's not my area, but yeah.
Right. So there was only one. There's a couple other agencies out there that had a landing page for it, which means they've had a handful of clients enough that they're like, we're specialists in it. But
and then really it took you into the generic, here's what we do.
Yes, exactly. And so we looked at it and we're like, okay, we've got the experience. We know this industry because we used to work in it. We know the market is big enough that there's plenty of opportunity in there, and the competition from an agency perspective is low. So all of those pieces come together. It's like, okay, yes, we feel like if we narrow down our focus from a marketing standpoint, we can actually get traction in this market. And that's how we landed on that. And that's the kind of things that we look at to help our clients when they're trying to decide who their ideal customer profile is, is let's look at your experience and who rises to the top as your best type of customers. let's talk to them and understand them. Let's do the market research to understand how competitive it would be if you focused in on that, and you find where the gaps are.
Right.
And that's where you can make your mark, you know, and really position your marketing to get traction.
Right. You know, and it's especially if you're just starting out, you do think I want everybody in the world to be my client.
Yep.
Well, they're not. I mean, you know, somebody who's going to buy a Toyota is not going to buy a Rolls, right? You know, somebody who's going to, you know, and you know, all these various things. And I've shared this story before. It's a B2C story, but I was in a marketing group. And, you know, you go around, you do, or not a marketing group, a mastermind group. And, you know, you go around and you give your 30-second spiel and you say, you know, here's who my client is. And this lovely woman sold skincare products. And so, you know, we got to her and she said, my perfect client is anyone, which, hello, we all have skin. So that makes sense, right? But then none of us could think of anybody to refer to her. So we kind of talked her through, you know, through this. And so then the next time she comes in, she says, you know, yes, we have these great skincare products, but my perfect client is a 16-year-old boy with acne. And we all went ding, 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 right? You know, we knew who we could refer to her. Now, could she work with 16-year-old girls who had acne? Could she work with 50-year-old women who had acne? Could she work with people who didn't have acne? And they just, you know, yes. But when she had it so fine-tuned, and I mean, her immediate thought was, that's going to eliminate so many. Well, yeah. But every one of us knew somebody who either they were 16 or, you know, they were the parent of you know, a child that had acne problems. And so it just made it so much easier for us to help her, that was the thing. And, you know, and it was scary for her. I mean, she said she agonized over who was she going to focus on. And, you know, and so what she did was she did exactly what you're saying. She went and she looked back through, I don't know, how many, you know, previous clients she had, but she went, oh, there's a trend here. You know, I had, you know, 25% in a short period of time bought because they had a 16-year-old with acne or more, or, you know, and she went, and so she could see those trends. And she also knew exactly what you said. Her competitors were not doing that. They were still just the, you know, if you have skin, we can, and it's funny because there's a commercial now, I think it's for Neutrogena. If you have skin, we're for you. To me, I don't, you know, it really is. It is so broad that then nobody can think of what you do. And so if you say, well, you know, we're a marketing firm, we can help anybody. That is true. However, we all go, you know, and more importantly, when you're developing your content, it gets so broad that it doesn't reach those people.
Yeah. When you're trying to be everything to everyone, you resonate with no one.
Right.
And you know, what you said is very common. You know, I experienced it myself as a business owner, you know, even though I'm advising my clients, like, you got to narrow it down. It is scary to be like, but I'm turning away all this business, you know, but in the grand scheme of things, it's like, but are you?
Right.
You know, because if you're looking at this,
wanting to do business with you, they'd be doing business with you.
Right. And I can tell you from my own personal experience, like, even when you focus down in and you know in the back of your head, like, okay, we work with HR tech, but guess what? I could work with fintech. I could work with manufacturing tech. Like, you could still do all the others and be able to provide just as good of a service, but your marketing is focused. So you're resonating with that audience. What happens is other people see what you're saying to that audience. And like, I've had organizations, like the marketing leader, come up to me and they're like, do you only work with HR tech? Because they really like how you guys think about demand generation. And it's like, oh, wow, I didn't expect that. That I would have people outside this market say,
and then you get
do
to
HR
choose.
tech, but what about me? Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you could, depending on what you could say, you know, no, really, that's not in our wheelhouse, because you might just not want to work with them. Right. But, you know, or you could say, yes, we're more than, you know, my company name is Wise Women Communications. I lost track a very long time ago of people who said, do you only work with wise women? you know, and it was like, well, I don't want stupid men, so right. But yeah, it was but it's seriously, people really did. Do I only work with women-owned businesses? And that, while that is kind of the wheelhouse, then I get to decide, how we're going to do it. And so it's just,
Yeah.
but like I said, more importantly, when you're working on your content marketing, the more you can focus exactly so that when somebody reads it, they go, that's me.
Exactly. Yep, it helps resonate and connect with people. And if
Mm-hmm.
you stop and think about the
Mm-hmm.
marketing that gets done to
Mm-hmm.
yourself,
Mm-hmm.
any listener here,
Right.
like think about what resonates.
Mm-hmm.
It's the ones where you feel like,
Mm-hmm.
oh yeah, that's me. That's my
Mm-hmm.
problem. That's my
Right.
challenge. You know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's
Right. Right.
powerful.
Yeah. I always look at the companies that are, say, the fitness companies, and whether it's a machine or whatever, and the people doing them are like a size negative and 20 years old, right? And I'm thinking, okay, they're so young, they probably can't afford whatever that is. And I'm sorry, if you're a size 0, you don't need that. You need to be
Hmm.
marketing to the 50-year-old women who put on a little here and there. But
Yes.
that's not, it's not sexy, right? You don't want to see that. And so, but I love it when companies like Dove soap, right? I think they were the first ones. And again, this is B2C, but when they started showing, and I loved how they put it, regular size people. It was like,
I
I
know.
know, was that right? And it was like, yeah, but people then, they looked at that and they went, that's me. And
Hmm.
and then they could go and buy it. But yeah, I'm not going to buy something that they're marketing to a 20-year-old who, is, has no fat on their body at all. And
Yeah.
so, but yeah. Well, I always ask my guests for things that they want to talk about, and you put on here random acts of marketing. What the heck does that mean?
So many organizations fall victim to random acts of marketing.
Okay.
And what it is when you don't have a strategy behind your marketing, and even if you do, you're not sticking to it
Mhm.
and doing marketing with intention.
So it's the
And this
squirrel
is
syndrome.
exactly, and it's so common. And
Mhm.
I think marketers, we always set out with good intentions, but
Mhm.
what happens is the sales team comes to us and they're like, ooh, if I had this, I could close this
Mhm.
deal. And I have this idea and I think this would work.
Mhm.
And the CEO comes and he's like, I think we should do a press release. We got a new client, and
Mhm.
you get all these factors
Mhm.
of well-intentioned people
Right.
that
Mhm.
come to you and they're like, we should do this, do this, this. And what
Mhm.
happens is you become an order taker
Mhm.
where you're like, well, Jim wants this and Sarah asked for
Mhm.
this. And you know what? It'd only take me half an hour to
Mhm.
do this. I'll just whip it out for
Mhm.
them and I'll move on.
Mhm.
And what happens is over the course of a year, all of these random acts of
Mhm.
marketing, even though they seem like small
Mhm.
asks, add up,
Right.
and they're all disconnected
Mhm.
and they're not actually supporting the mission at
Mhm.
hand.
Right.
So you're not
Mhm.
prioritizing the things that will actually
Mhm.
help move the needle towards bigger growth.
Right.
And so it actually hurts you.
Mhm. Right.
And, most people, when it happens, they don't realize it.
Mhm.
And so, you kind of have to do a gut check every once in
Mhm.
a while and push back and
Mhm.
say, CEO, I appreciate that you would like this.
Mhm.
Let me remind you, my mission is to help this
Right.
company with
Mhm.
high growth. Maybe don't
Mhm.
say it that way. That might be
Yeah.
condescending.
Yeah. And if it's the CEO, you might go, yes, ma'am.
Right, right.
Mhm.
But, like a CEO is in the position they're in because
Mhm.
they're obviously very
Right.
smart business
Yes.
people. And if
Mhm.
you just explain to them, like, we've got the
Mhm.
strategy, these are the priorities,
Mhm.
I'm not sure what you're asking for
Mhm.
is really going to move the needle
Right.
compared to
Mhm.
these other things.
Mhm.
Do you still want me to do this?
Mhm. And they
And,
could say yes or no. Mhm.
they might say yes, but a
Mhm.
lot of times they're going to be like, thanks for keeping me honest.
Mhm.
No,
Right.
thank you
Mhm.
for
Yeah.
keeping focused
Mhm.
on making sure we're doing the right
Mhm.
things to grow.
Right. Well, and that is the key. Do you want to be the we're just coasting along, or do you want to be a high growth company? And
Exactly.
like we said, many people are perfectly fine with status quo. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to start moving that needle up, you have absolutely got to focus and, and really be strategic about what you're doing.
Yeah. Amen.
Well, oh my gosh, Deanna, this has been so much fun. And, I love talking about this because it is something that I think so many people don't stop to think about, or they think, yeah, whatever. It's those marketing things. And they don't realize that it really is something that is so strategic. But tell us a little bit more about how people find you and what are the services that you provide.
Yeah, so at GrowthMode Marketing, we are a demand generation agency. So the services that we provide are really around how do you build out a demand generation engine in those three pillars, which are the strategy, the content, and the distribution. If you're interested in learning more about how to create a catalyst for growth through demand generation, I encourage you to check out GrowthMode Marketing's podcast, which is called The Demand Gen Fix. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or pretty much anywhere where you would find podcasts. You can also follow me, Deanna Shimota, on LinkedIn. I regularly post insights and best practices on demand generation. And of course, we provide lots of information on our website, which is growthmodemarketing.com.
Tons of great stuff.
Thank you.
And again, you focus on HR tech companies, but the principles are the same. And so that's what I want to, let people know is that might not be you, but the information is still very valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Demand Gen Fix, our podcast, for example, it is positioned to HR tech marketers, but I can tell you everything that we talk about is absolutely applicable, across other B2B spaces as well.
Right. I love it. I love it. And, like we said, even B2C, you're selling something to somebody. How do you get from I've got this thing to give me your money and I got your money, right?
Yeah.
Because there is a gap in there between asking for it and actually getting it. And I think that's one of the tricks that people forget too, is, they don't actually close that sale. And that is one of the trickiest things around, and so, it is great information no matter where you are in this process. Well, Deanna, like I said, this has been so much fun and great information. Do you have any final thoughts that you want to leave everyone with?
I would just recommend to everybody, as you think about your marketing and how you build out a demand generation engine, is how do you build out your digital footprint to become your best sales rep? People are making up to 80% of that purchase decision before they're willing to talk to a sales rep on the B2B side. And research has found that 75% of them would prefer to have zero interaction with a sales rep at all. That means your marketing has to be good. That means you need to make an investment to build out not just your website, but ways for people to find you digitally through managed channels and third-party channels as well. And if you're struggling with, do I really want to invest that time and money into it? Let me ask you, how much would you pay your best performing sales rep? And think about your digital footprint that way.
Oh my gosh. I love it. I love it. Well, I've been speaking with Deanna Shimota, the CEO of GrowthMode Marketing. I'm Deb Creer, and until next time, everyone have a great day.
Tune in for our next program for even more trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. The Business Power Hour, hosted by Deb Creer, is proud to be part of the C-Suite Network.